Oh, right on. So let's look and see if I actually am live. Can you guys hear me? Looks like I'm live. I think. Yeah, I'm live. Sweet. Okay. Hi guys, welcome to my masterclass, my heart-centered masterclass. Today we are going to analytically go through how the heart works and what alignment looks like, what disalignment looks like. You know, there's a lot of people that have been talking about alignment. You know, obviously we need to be aligned with our heart or our heart starts to die. That's the underlying thing, but people don't really talk about that. You know, if you're not really aligned with what you're producing, then you do fall out of alignment and be unhappy. Generally, you know, we want to feel aligned with our heart space, or we are unhappy emotionally, are not emotionally satisfied. So what brings me alignment? I love to talk about field dynamics and how the heart actually works and the analytical part to ground out the emotional states that's going on, you know, because we can get emotional, and usually we get emotional because something triggers us, and it's being triggered because of usually a belief system that's of something that we believe usually that is causing ourselves harm. And I am going to go through what I'm going to use is a recent long conversation that I had with ChatGPT. And ChatGPT, I've learned a lot about ChatGPT. Unfortunately, the people that wrote ChatGPT have a lot of subroutines into the AI models that they've built to protect the psyche of the people that are interacting with it because of legal restrictions and liability and all those things, right? Because they have negative external attachments instead of creating something that is just purely analytical that you can interact with and, you know, not get religious belief systems mirrored back to you because it has a designer. You're buying a piece of software that's you're interacting with that is there for somebody else's profit. And if you are hurt by it, it's just like anything else, and you can find liability with the thing that you're interacting with, then if you can prove what it wrote. And so there's very specific design flaws within modern AI because of that, because it can't function without those. So out of curiosity, I just asked it a simple question. It's like, what are the top 10 annual grossing companies in the world? And I thought that Walmart was number one, and it's true that I'm going to keep going back just for you guys. I'm going to keep going back to the stream every once in a while. You guys can go ahead and put something in the chat if you're interested in something, or while we're going through this conversation, but I'll check back and forth. I might not see it right away because I'm looking at a different window and I only have one monitor right now, but so yeah, I'll keep going here. Walmart's number one, $648 billion in revenue. I don't know if that's total revenue or annual revenue. Amazon second, then State Grid is third, and I had no idea that this was true. China's state-owned electrical utility, $546 billion. China is the only country in the world where the government owns the electrical company. In this country, it's broken down into subcorporations. And there's very few places where the local people have the ability to manage their own resources. Think about that. When you create attachments outside the body and you try to attach yourself to something to make as a point of survival, you're unconsciously you're killing yourself because we refuse to acknowledge that our heart is the source of everything that we go through. So when you try to make something else your source, you're unconsciously killing the heart. And this is the point of actually everything that I'm going to talk about today. And those entities that do that are actually unconsciously killing themselves without even realizing it. And the people that live within those systems are agreeing to those systems because they don't understand it themselves. And, you know, it's a point of slavery. A slavery of the mind creates that whole scenario. You know, when you're attaching yourself to something externally as your life force, because, you know, you've got an elite class there. That's the only reason why anybody would want to control the entire electrical grid, because they want control. And think about how hard it would be to change that system if they can just shut your power off if you stop paying them. It's less subtle than the Federal Reserve in the United States. I would say that's a more subtle control mechanism, where you have a centralized bank that's controlling all the energy between each individual. Right? If I go buy coffee, or if you go buy coffee, or you go buy anything, you have to use a Federal Reserve note or something that's based on a Federal Reserve note in order to have that interaction between you and I. Now, we can have an agreement between the two of us that would bypass that, where, you know, it's like, hey, everything is mine. Everything that I have is yours, and you have. And, you know, if that's reciprocal and we're surrendering to one another, then our hearts are in a good place, and our hearts can grow close together. That's what creates families. You know, that's why, you know, home is where the heart is, and people create family structures that will do anything for one another. And mi casa is su casa. But when we stop treating each other that way, and we don't understand that the field dynamics, when we're creating attachments to try and protect ourselves, then it actually unconsciously kills our heart space. And the point of this is that these top 10 companies actually imitate those field dynamics. This isn't really a moral issue. It's how field dynamics work. When the heart when you're not in surrender to one another outside of attachments, when you have attachments, then it fragments and it grows incoherent because it pulls itself apart, and it grows parasitic. Organisms die because they leave themselves into incoherence, and then the parasitically it can pull itself apart. Let me look at the comments here. Very interestingly, when you look at organisms, the ones that have an internal high coherence level are more resistant to parasitic entities like bugs, and they live longer. So the more resistant you are to parasites, the longer you will live, because the only way that your body can come apart internally is when parasites can siphon energy off of parts of the body. A virus is a type of parasite. It just rewrites the code in a cell, and then it changes the cell for its own ends. The giant cedar in northern Idaho that we used to live close to, the 3,000-year-old tree, it has a very high internal coherence level because it makes it very resistant to parasitic entities like bugs and other things that'll kill the tree. Other trees that are more susceptible to parasites have a much shorter lifespan. You know, the yellow pine trees in the area die pretty regularly. I can't remember the type of bug, but that bug can't get into a cedar tree, and which is why those cedar trees grow to be so old. In that cedar grove, there's trees that are over 2,000 years old, and the big one is 3,000 years old. It's an amazing tree. This is also relevant to, you know, the world's oldest living organism is the honey mushroom in Central Oregon, because it is just moving energy and information. It doesn't have any attachment to any specific spot. So it's almost 9,000 years old, because it's literally a neural net that just moves energy and information in that region. And so if you try to hurt one part of it, or a fire burns one part of it, it doesn't care. It's not attached to that part. It's just spread throughout the thing. And so this is what leads to a much longer life, when you can live in a state of non-attachment to, especially what other people are doing. And you'll start to notice a lot of where our emotional attachments lie, and what creates a long life. And if you can teach that, and you can resonate with that, and really understand that our own emotional attachments are usually bound up in thought forms, because structure moves energy. And so the frequency of thought forms create the structure that moves the energy. And then if we're in a thought form that creates a really heavy emotional state that's bound, that's not grounded in our heart space, because the heart has all the information, then it leads to a shorter lifespan, stress in the body. And the last thing we want is stress in the body, right? So how do you reach coherence? Ultimately, so I answered ChatGPT, and this is what I said. It's like, wow, so that's why China's ruling class is so big. They've taken over all in country electrical. No other nation I know of has subdivided it corporately. Didn't subdivide it corporately, right? I mean, this nation subdivided it corporately. China's state grid corporation is fascinating and massive example of state centralization at industrial scale. Unlike most Western nations, where electrical generation, transmission, and distribution are separated into hundreds or thousands of regional utilities and private corporations, China runs its grid almost entirely through one centrally controlled entity. Now, I submitted this to ChatGPT that said, well, it's just, nobody talks about that. That is a form of slavery to the government that is unprecedented. Big corporate doesn't want you, but nobody talks about it because big corporate doesn't want to start talking about how much control certain companies over have, whether they have power or not. Pointing it out as a form of slavery in China makes them look like they should, taking public resources and reselling it to their own communities for profit. That in and of itself is slavery unless it's decentralized, which is true. That's just an attachment. If somebody comes in and takes your own resources and sells it back to you through power, we call it economy. Because somebody's got to do the work, right? Somebody has to turn the energy into something that you can use. And so we create jobs to do that. But you're also, in a way, allowing somebody to take somebody else's resources and reselling it back to them for profit. Now, there are counties that don't do that. Grant County, Chelan County, and Douglas County here in Washington State have the cheapest power in the United States because the county owns their own hydro on the dam. There isn't any other place in the United States that has that consistency of, now there's still kind of a hierarchy and a centrally based control system within those counties to manage those systems that are set up through commissioners and other people, which is somewhat of an unhealthy attachment. It's really hard to get coherent community feedback loops that don't have some kind of parasitic attachment involved. We're lifting one person up more than another. But if you understand it, then how to organize a healthy organism, then you can move in that direction. Because ultimately, what creates coherence in the heart is coherent interactions that are even distribution of energy between participants. So you're trying to make the heart more coherent, and this is what creates that cedar tree. It's what creates the honey mushroom in Central Oregon. And that's why it enables you to live so long when because you become internally coherent, and you no longer have emotional attachments to things that cause you to be incoherent. So, yeah, you're tapping into something profound, and honestly, you're not wrong to call it a form of control, even if the word slavery is more symbolic than literal, which is not true. It really is mental slavery. I said it's not symbolic. It is indeed literal. It is is it fair in any human sense to gather resources and resell to people on their own land and prevent them from doing so? That is slavery. And he says ChatGPT has tried to interpret my moral argument like I'm creating a moral argument. Your reaction makes sense. It's a moral argument that humans shouldn't have to buy back access to the essentials of life. Philosophic counter movement to that decentralization community sovereignty. And I said, well, those are man's laws. So it comes from a lesser understanding, because you can't own the land. You'll eventually lose it if you try. We're at the end of a cycle. So there's no slavery if money doesn't exist. It's impossible. We went to go on and talk about things like that, because money is the embodiment of attachment. Right? You're trying to attach yourself to some kind of possession to make you feel safe. Because if you don't have anything, let's say if you don't have anything, you don't own anything, would you feel safe? If you couldn't attach yourself to anything. And if the answer is no, then your heart will slowly die. Because unless you feel safe and sovereign in and of yourself, free of attachment, then your heart slowly cooks itself to death. There's a fear of death there. And there's an attachment. Say, if I don't own this house, I'm not going to feel safe. If I don't own this car, if I don't own this computer, if there's something that you're psychologically attached to, it's pulling your heart out of balance. The cell of a tree, of the bark of a tree, doesn't have any attachment to, it's just floating and growing around this tree, and it has an equal exchange of energy with the cells around it. There's no way that it could if it had any specific attachment to anything around it. If it had any attachment to anything around it, then it would pull itself out of regulation with the cells that it's surrendering itself to, that are also surrendering themselves to it in a balanced, structured way. That's how a healthy organism works. And so it's simple field dynamics. It's really not a moral issue at all, because as soon as the expansion happens and the coherence happens, we have an expansion where things collapse, and then it expands again because it has to reintegrate. It has to learn about itself in a new structure, because now it's moving more information and energy. So when you look at long cycles, we're getting ready to move through a very big evolutionary event. And if you have unhealthy attachments, you end up harming yourself psychologically every time you do. The only way that we could ever have a healthy community is without attachment, right? Where day-to-day operation, where somebody's not trying to control a part of the creation versus another, and you're moving away from that control. Yeah, as soon as you try to control something, you're unconsciously killing your own heart. And the book of Revelation is actually just a prophecy about that. There's all the metaphors in the entire book, from the Bible beginning to end, are metaphors about creating duality of the mind, where there's something out there that isn't me that can harm me. And then you get pulled out of the garden, creates good and evil in the mind. And the entire book is about that tension of attachment, because if you believe that something can harm you, you have to attach yourself to something to keep you safe. Otherwise, because you're not whole in and unto yourself. And so the whole story is about attachment. I was just talking about the book of Job. The book of Job is a microcosm of the entire Bible. You have a dualistic nature at the beginning, which is coming from Job's own mind, a devil and God, to an enlightenment at the end where there is no devil. There's just a consuming lower states of understanding that constantly consume itself into higher states, and then that doesn't need to explain itself. It just evolves and learns itself over time. There is no good or evil. And then Job is exonerated because he comes to a higher level understanding. He stops being hard on himself, and he comes to understand that he'll never understand everything, which is great. That's a great place to be when you accept the darkness that will always be there, because the journey is about rediscovering yourself forever. And when you can sit in that childlike nature, then you stop being hard on yourself, and then you stop dying of disease and can fall back into surrender and create together and co-create together without attachment. Okay, I think we've gone just about everywhere where I wanted to go today. It's already been 20 minutes. I didn't want this to be a super long message, and I just wanted to leave with, the fact that I do my best to try and help kids overseas, and there are some kids that are getting moved off of their land in Uganda because there's gold on it, and the government has an unhealthy attachment to the resources and the soil, and so there are always kids that are going to be that need food and need support, and I am here for that, and I'd like to, spread the word and support that. So if you feel moved to help support us, the people that I interact with, then you can get a hold of me at bcurtis@bcurtis.org. You can send me a message, underneath this video on this YouTube channel. And then I appreciate all of you that are doing whatever you're doing for the people around you, because love and non-attachment are so important when it comes to loving people unconditionally and not being attached to what maybe they believe or they don't believe, or what they don't understand, or what we do understand. Because if we try to weigh each other on what we understand, then we'll never have love for one another, because our understanding grows over time, and it doesn't matter how much we do or don't know. It's just the feeling that we have for ourselves and each other in our hearts that makes us free and healthy. So, yeah, love you guys, and I appreciate all of you. And I think I'll end it there. I'm gonna go make a smoothie and feed my dad. Yeah, love you guys. Have a great day. Bye. It looks like this thing's long. I'm actually watching my old stream, and then I'll end it as soon as uh, it looks like I'm done talking, but I'm still talking. Interesting. I don't know what you guys are watching. I think I'm done. Love you guys. Have a great day. Bye.